Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the SEC's misguided climate crusade has clearly overstepped their statutory authority by requiring excessive, costly, and detailed climate-related regulations. Instead of meeting the needs of all investors, the SEC has shifted towards pandering towards progressive shareholders and green activists. This is a dangerous path to go down. It's will have negative consequences for all investors. And the 886-page climate rule was caused compliance costs to skyrocket for public companies who must comb through the burdensome rule to ensure they are meeting all the requirements. The SEC must return to their core mission and protect the interests of all investors in public companies, not just those who are fixated on politicizing boardrooms and our capital markets. So, Professor White, could you elaborate on how this climate rule will increase costs and burdensome compliance requirements for public companies? And I got a follow-up for you.
Certainly, the direct cost of the disclosure, as the SEC has estimated, is going to increase costs by upwards of 20%, which is one of the biggest increases, at least that I'm familiar with in recent times. It's also going to have indirect costs or spillover costs in a sense that it's going to, as Mr. Wright said, raise legal liability, and it could have a dampening effect on capital formation. So those together are an enormous cost.
Well, another question to you then. This climate rule will increase costs for public companies. We've said that, but many of these costs will also prove to be unbearable for small insurers or issuers. And another concern of mine is how this rule will affect small companies' ability to compete on a global stage. So specifically, the increased reporting requirements and compliance costs will serve as a barrier to entry into global markets for smaller companies. So the SEC's purpose is to allow American businesses to compete, not to try and tie them down with excessive compliance costs and burdensome regulations, which seems to be what we're going through with this administration. So one more time, Professor White, what impacts will these costs have on American competitiveness, especially regarding the ability of smaller companies to compete globally?
So regulations always have a disproportionate or outsized effect on small companies. And so these regulations I would expect to be more impactful to small companies. We might see fewer IPOs, we might see companies staying private longer. And we may see companies moving to other jurisdictions, which impacts us in terms of losing people, losing tax revenues. And your notion of, creating an impediment, I like to view these types of regulations as like a brick. While one rule might be a small block, eventually you've built a barrier to going public. And so once that barrier is formed, we lose competitiveness on a global stage.
Thank you. Now, this climate rule will open various challenges for companies who are already public, for companies who are looking to go public. This rule is a significant barrier to entry and will surely dissuade companies from undertaking the necessary steps to go public in fear of the compliance burdens and costs that they will be subject to. So companies will face other challenges like increased risk of litigation and the complexities the challenges will come with. Because of this rule and the consequences it will bring, companies will have to shift their resources towards compliance and have to sacrifice key services enjoyed by their shareholders, or they will refuse to go public in order to protect themselves from needless attacks down at them by the SEC. Mr. Stebbins, can you expand on how this misguided and harmful rule will deter companies from going public? Pretty simple.
I think rules aren't passed in a vacuum, and I think if you have to look at what's happened in the last few years in general, and this isn't the only rule that's been passed, right? So it's very hard to be a public company right now, and I think all these rules incrementally make it harder, including this one.
Well, lots of times you hire these compliance officers, it takes away from the core mission. Bottom line, right?
Say that again, sir, I'm sorry?
I said compliance officers. Compliance officer versus salesman, that tells you the difference right there, right?
Well, there's certainly a lot of costs built in, and there's a lot of costs built into this release, right? Yeah. Attorneys, accountants, consultants, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you for that, and I yield my time back.